Hello and welcome to my second speed draw. This video is going to devolve very quickly because I'm going to explain to you exactly why it took me so long to finish this piece. First of all, I would like to say a very, very late happy birthday to my friend who is the subject of this piece. I put a lot of pressure on myself to complete this in a certain amount of time, and so it was the only piece I really worked on for a very long amount of time. I'm not looking at my calendar right now, so I cannot tell you how long it actually took, and I'm a little afraid to check, to be perfectly honest with you. Really, this video should serve as a what not to do in terms of how you should start your piece. Because I started this being like, oh yeah, I'm going to draw my friend and it's going to be great. Except I had absolutely no vision for how I wanted the piece to turn out. And so each step that I took, I immediately decided against it and chose to do something else. I also chose to keep making this piece bigger and bigger and bigger, and so I had to make my canvas bigger and bigger and bigger, which ended in a really chaotic conflict of trying to still make the composition of this piece look good while also keeping to the inspiration that I eventually found because I just started with her face and started drawing. And instead of starting over, which I usually do, I just decided to keep it and build upon it, which, duly noted, can be harder than just starting over. One of the things I chose to build on was to add flowers to this piece, except flowers happen to be one of my least favorite things to draw because they're basically just the same shape over and over again. And my least favorite thing is drawing the same shape over and over again. I actually cut a lot of some of the minute drawing processes with the flowers specifically because it took me so long and it was so arduous that I did not want to put you guys through that as well. Now, I'm not going to say I dislike this piece or I think that it's bad. I just think that I could have done a lot better had I sat down, created a vision, maybe brought in the images that I was referencing before I started drawing, instead of doing whatever it was that I did the past month. It might be longer. Eventually, I came to the point where I realized the images and references I wanted in this piece was to bring in the image of Virgo as the star sign because this friend is a Virgo, and I wanted to incorporate the imagery that goes along with the Virgo maiden, as well as the birth flower for Virgo and her birth month. I think a few things suffered from me putting so much pressure on myself that I just wanted to get through the process was the wings. I could have done a much better job on those. The anatomy, as you saw in the beginning, I was trying to map out her hips and her legs and it just wasn't working. And so the artist hack is to just put them in a dress. And then the dress on top of that, I was not able to put as much creative passion into designing. I like the shape and a couple of the elements that I made with it, but ultimately there was just this space that ended up in the dress that kind of makes it feel a little more flat than I would have liked it to turn out. But again, I just wanted to call it good enough, and I felt like the rest of it was more than good enough and the dress was just good enough. So we kept on and carried on. And by we, I mean me and sometimes my cat that would sit on top of my sketch pad and interrupt my drawing process. At this stage in the sketch, I thought the worst was over. I thought I'm finally fine-tuning the way that I want the base drawing to be, and the rest is going to be easy. I'm going to line it, and I'm going to color it, and I'm going to shade it, and those are usually the least challenging parts, especially when I have a chaotic starting process like I did with this one. And I will say that the lining process on this was really fun. I really enjoyed the lining process. But unfortunately, the worst was to come, because then I realized I had to choose my colors. I do want to take a moment to say a couple of nice things about this piece, because I don't usually have such a bad view on my pieces, and I want to say that it's not the piece itself that was the problem, it was just how I went about it. And I think all art, regardless of the inner critic that I might have about my art, deserves praise in some form. I really had fun with the hair, but I have fun with hair most of the time. I think it's one of my favorite things to draw. I was also very proud because I really think that this looked like my friend. I am also really glad how the feet turned out. I don't often draw bare feet because it's never the focus or they're wearing shoes or something like that. So being able to portray just bare feet was fun to draw because I just never really do. Like I said, I think I could have done a better job with the wings. In the past, I have really liked to draw wings. But in this piece, I found that creating just an outer shape of something and then adding more depth and detail to it later with color and texture really was the move with this piece. And I even ended up erasing some lines in the flowers and the wheat stalks to give the sense of there's just the outside silhouette, and then I added my details in the coloring and shading instead. It was another added frustration because essentially I was going back on work I had spent so much time doing, but in the end it just felt and looked better. Because like I said, the dress ended up looking flat because there was no detail in the majority of the skirt, and I didn't want to put detail in the majority of the skirt. I just did not have the energy for that. But compared to that big open blank space and the big open blank space of the wings as well, the detail for the flowers and the stalks were a little too chaotic. But it was also a style that I had really applied to before. This is the first time that I was like, oh, I can do this thing where I just add the impression of the outline of this very detailed thing and then add as many details as I want with my shading. Because most of the time, I just like to draw a sketch and that's it. So I have more practice with just sketching out an idea and adding as many details as I want and then leaving it to rot in my folders, and then having less practice actually lining a piece and drawing it and turning it into something that people are going to look at and see as a comprehensive art piece and not just the ramblings of whatever character I wanted to draw that day. And essentially this is the path that I am choosing to embark on with my YouTube channel in creating art that is intentionally viewed to be art and not just me trying to visualize stories and characters that I've been making up since childhood. Now, because I want to share those stories and those characters, I will end up making art with those subjects, but my goal is to turn them more into comprehensive art pieces and not just something that doesn't make sense outside of the context of just my own head. I want to be able to have a single artwork where someone can extrapolate what is going on and what it means by a first look instead of having to read a paragraph of backstory or me just ramble about this one story that I came up one night when I was 12. And I think that's one of the reasons why I put so much pressure on myself with this one in particular. Partly because I wanted to make sure that I finished this for my friend as a birthday present, even as I got farther and farther away from her actual birthday. It's because I wanted to make sure that I could actually finish it, that I could dedicate my time to finishing something instead of giving up halfway through or making the millionth sketch and saying that's good enough. I wanted to force myself to finish this so that I would set a precedent for myself to finish more things, to stick to the learning process and make sure that I held myself accountable for my own dream. And sometimes that learning process looks like me struggling to draw a wheat stalk. Okay, but can anyone really tell me why this was so hard? Why are they so hard? At one point, I thought about taking the one little shape and just copy and pasting it over and over again, but then it just looked bad and inorganic, and I could not bear to look at that, despite the fact that I struggled with this so hard and I left that part in on purpose. Sometimes you just gotta write on your canvas about how you feel. And now it just feels like I've been watching myself draw weed stalks for a very long time, and now I'm talking about weed stalks for a very long time. I will die a very happy woman if I don't have to draw weed stalks ever again in this much detail ever again. What I realized helped me get through some of this was to watch YouTube videos of creators that I haven't watched in a while, and even some like horror video game playthroughs, which I'm usually not keen on doing because I don't enjoy horror and I am a little scaredy cat. But when my eyes are on something else and I'm focusing here, having a different input is really helpful, because then it's not just this over and over again in silence. I have someone else talking, I'm engaged in a story, and I have never watched so much YouTube as I have while drawing this in a very long time. And it was kind of nice. I also started watching some other YouTubers who do webtoons and have advice and content out on YouTube about their experiences and a lot of advice, which was really helpful because someday I want to draw a full webcomic. I saw videos about people talking about webtoon, and I'll address this later, but I said that I couldn't find any content about webtoon on YouTube, and that's false. I don't know what happened with my first research, but that's wrong. Now, the content that I want to create doesn't exist exactly as I was thinking, but there are people who go over different tropes in webtoon and different webcomics and talk about that. And I find that really interesting. I love talking about tropes and stories and what is good storytelling and what's not good storytelling. But like I said, I'm going to be talking about this in my video, which would be a webtoon review, except I haven't had enough time to finish said review, so it's most likely just going to be a talking point about webtoon content on YouTube. I apologize for this part in my drawing because the eyeballs get a little creepy. Sometimes you need to take them out of their sockets to figure out where they are situated in the eyeball socket. I think you all can tell by now how hard this was for me to draw by how long this video was, and I sped up this video a lot, and I cut out a lot of stuff while still maintaining all of the major things that I did. In the future, I'm hoping to keep these to like a minimum of 20 minutes, although I believe this video is more like 30. But again, I sped this up a lot, so I'm not even sure how many hours I spent on this piece. I could go back to my original screen recordings to figure out how long this took, but to figure out how long it took without breaks, I'm not sure. But because I was procrastinating so much on this, I would just take breaks because I was just exhausted of the monotony of drawing weed stalks, or just struggling with one piece for so long that I'd have to set it down, but I would still keep the screen recorder on, so I'd force myself to eventually zone back in and just finish whatever it was I thought that I needed to finish for the day. One of the things that I'm hoping to observe about my art from doing these speed draws is how long it takes me to complete a piece through each step, because that's how I price a commission, is how long it takes me to complete the piece, depending on what the client agrees on for me to do each step. And by that I mean if they want me to even finish lining and coloring it, or things like that. And this piece made me really nervous because it felt like it just took forever and forever to finish, and it wasn't even that good, or at least it didn't feel like I put enough quality into this piece to justify it having taken that long. And what if I hit an art block while I'm working on someone's image and it just takes forever, and it's because I'm having a bad time that person has to pay more? I know this isn't great advertising, but I'm still just figuring it out, and I'm being very honest. And I'm hoping that it shows the audience that I'm trying to have integrity with my pricing, while also keeping the integrity of what my work is worth. And I will say that I think in the future, when I have a client, I'll be much more excited to follow through with a project rather than having a self-imposed project that I felt like I needed to finish just because. There's been many times that someone will ask me to draw something and I'll just whip it out in record time because it was so exciting for me to work on something based on someone else's idea that they were excited for me to create. And I think that the collaboration will give me a much better mindset when going about pieces that take a lot of time, and I'll be much less inclined to procrastinate and also have a much better starting point. Such as, I don't usually color my line art. That was something that I just decided to do because it felt like it made the piece have a little bit more quality, and it didn't feel as starkly contrasted with itself, because all of the colors that I chose were very light and bright. But working with someone else, they may not want that. And so I won't have so many self-imposed rules and regulations, because I'll be working with someone who has something in mind already, and I'll give them the options, and we can see how something comes together. I only ever received a little bit of feedback from my husband on this piece because it was a little bit of surprise to my friends. But frequently I'll ask my friends for advice. I'll be like, hey, look at this. What do you think? And I have a lot of artistic friends, so I'll have them take a look at it and they'll say, oh, I really like this thing, but oh, maybe you could do this thing with it, or maybe this thing looks a little wonky. And it's just really helpful to have a secondary voice. And I think that working with someone else, like a client, is also going to be really helpful, just to have a second pair of eyes to notice something that I've been staring at for who knows how long. I tried to cut out my switching to the browser, but at this point, when I was trying to reference the flowers, I didn't want to go through the process of screenshotting and putting on my canvas, so I just kept switching back and forth, and it was just a pain to edit, so just excuse that. But this is the part that I was talking about where I chose to just add more depth to the flowers that had a lot of detail instead of creating the outline with a lot of detail. I wasn't sure exactly how to go about the background, but I actually really liked how the symbol for Virgo turned out in the background. And then, as you'll see here in just a couple seconds, I ended up creating a colored vignette, or inverse vignette. I forget what the term for it is. and it created a nice little contrast along with all of the imagery and the shape of the wings against the M shape. I really liked how it turned out. Now, in the middle of this process, I had restructured and organized my brushes. You can see down on the bottom left, I have had the same little files for years, basically since 2017. The titles of the folders for the brushes, and it was about time to change it up and move brushes around to where I would actually use them and how to find them. And this program, Fire Alpaca, has a fun little database of brushes that you can just download from their resource of themselves. And so I was able to get some textures and fun rollers that I might be able to use later in like making webcomics. And I actually used one of the new textures in this piece for the wings. What I found is one of my favorite brushes, or is becoming one of my favorite brushes, is this marker brush, where before I would only use it every once in a while for the lining. Usually I would use one of the watercolor brushes, but there was one update to this Fire Alpaca where it changed how that brush worked, and then I could no longer use it for lining. So I ended up starting to use this one a lot more, and it's really grown on me. And you can see I'm even using it for like cell shading, where usually I would use like a pen. There's something about the texture of the marker that I really like. It gives it almost that old pen feeling. And depending on pressure, you can also change the shape. It can be used a little bit like a calligraphy pen as well, with its shape being slightly slanted. At this point, I started to get frustrated again because I didn't know where I wanted my light source to be. And so I just started doing something willy-nilly shading that ended up making my life much harder than it should have. The other thing I realized later, which you'll see, is I go back over the line colors and I darken the areas that ended up having to have a lot of shadow. So I have now learned that when I want to color my lines, I have to shade first and then I color my lines so that I know which lines need to be darker than the rest of that color block. Because otherwise it kind of ends up looking funny when the shadow is darker than the line that's supposed to be surrounding it. And it's not even, because then the other part of the body does have a darker line than the inside color. And again, I love drawing hair. Every process about drawing hair, I thoroughly enjoy. The sketching, the lining, the coloring, the shading, and the highlighting. I really enjoy drawing hair. Again, I did something here where I don't usually do, which is I will create a patch outline here and then shading inside of it. Frequently I'm too lazy and shade it and then erase the rest that doesn't need to be there, or just leave it there if it feels like it makes sense. But there was something about this where I felt like I really needed to be precise on it, and so when I did it with the hair, it really did create this depth that I haven't gotten a lot with other pieces, because I eventually chose a light source that was going to be from the top left, and so it created this really stark contrast that would happen with the hair and the way that it layered, because I wanted it to be such a bright point of light, considering that she is the maiden, she is Virgo, she has the 3 stalks of wheat, which is like a representation of summer going into harvest. and I always associate that with like a very bright afternoon, like pre-golden hour sunlight. So I wanted to create this gold lighting that would inevitably have some stark contrast and shading with her wings that are wrapped around her and just how much volume her hair has. I take one thing back. I actually did have one of my friends look at this, and it was during the sketching phase, and one of the things that she said was to help me out with the pose in the hand, because I had drawn that basket and everything, and that did not go well. And she suggested that I have the flowers that had been in the hand closest to her chest actually be stretched out in her hand as if she was offering them to someone, which I felt really went well with the theme of the maiden that I was then portraying. And just seeing it right now, I can see how that came out as a really good representation, and that it turned out better than I thought it was going to turn out. And I especially was very happy with how the structure and anatomy of the hands turned out. I used a reference for the outstretched hand with the flowers because it was a harder angle to draw from and one that I hadn't drawn from before. But the one shown here with her hand closer to her abdomen, I just free-handed that one and it turned out very well, and I am very proud of that hand. If you don't know anything about artists, it's that the hand is a fickle thing. Most comic artists will tell you, hide the hand because they're too hard to draw. And it's actually not that it's too hard to draw, it's that it's hard to make it look right without getting the uncanny valley feeling. So doing it right can require a lot of time. And it's usually an artist's favorite thing to complain about. And so while yes, there are times that I complain about drawing hands and how hard it might be, I think in the end I really do enjoy drawing hands. Or at least I enjoy it when I get it right. Which, by way of a lot of practice, I've come to be pretty good at succeeding in. If you are an artist watching this, I would love for you to comment and tell me what your least favorite thing to draw is, or what the most challenging thing to draw is. Because while flowers may be my least favorite thing, they're not a huge challenge to me. I just dislike the function of having to draw the same shape over and over again. But hands are a challenge in a different way. I enjoy that type of challenge. So I would love to hear from you guys. What's something that you just dislike even though you may not be bad at it? And what's something that you like because it challenges you? In another video I want to film, I would like to talk about making sure that you seek the challenge. Draw things that you don't like or don't think that you're good at, just because. And the theme of that video is going to be a little bit opposite of how I acted for this video, because I would like to instill a sense of don't take this too seriously, when for this piece at least, I took it a little too seriously, which went to my detriment, and would like to save future me and other people the sorrow of having to go through a self-imposed standard, and just keep a chill mindset about what you're creating until you are more confident in what you are creating. And with that, I am finishing up some details in shading and texture and lighting and all that. Messing with levels for how bright I want everything to be as well, or how dark. And lastly, in a piece, I will put over a color to indicate either light or an environment that they're in. And so I chose this nice, lovely golden aura. Off screen, I ended up making a few adjustments in how saturated it was and a few of just the color levels, and I went back and cleaned it up a little bit, but I didn't want to dredge on this video any longer than I had to, so I finished it off screen, and here is the final result for you to enjoy. And happy birthday to my friend Katie. May this video serve as a blessing and a lesson. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and I will see you in later videos. I promise.